Okay, let's now take a look at the access filters for the user IDs. To do this, I'm going to log in as administrator, default organization. I don't need to be doing anything in organizations just yet. But what I do want to do is I want to create a report that will have specific columns in it, and I'll use that to create the access filter. Now I've already created this, so we'll just take a look at what this report actually looks like. So if I just do a browse on reports, and we'll be able to see how we actually put this thing together. I have to call it not that, that's it, location access filter. So if I pop that open, so it's really important that the columns are labeled correctly within this particular report. So if I quickly edit the data on this particular report, we'll see what I've done here. So I've created 4 columns effectively, some of which are calculated fields, some of which are dragged in from my user ID or user dimension table that provided by you guys. I think it's called dim user, isn't it? So that's the one I've actually used. So I've created 2 fields that are calculated. One is called identifier type and one is called reference type. So identifier type, as we can see on here, just has email in it, because that's how we want to identify the user when they log in. They're going to log in with their email address, so that's how we're going to identify it. If they're going to log in with their user ID, not the email address, this would obviously need to say ID, and the identifier would need to be their ID. Okay, so that's how I've created this. I've created a calculated field for identifier type. The identifier is the email address, so I've dragged in the email address into here and then renamed it, which we can see if we do an edit. So view field is actually email address, but I've called it identifier. And reference type, this is the actual field it will reference for this user to pick out what the filter is. So the field is called location ID, and then that's the reference type, and then the reference ID is actually that field. So if we look at this, it is actually underscore location ID. So I've dragged that in. So if we take a look through this, we'll see there are email addresses that pop up. There's obviously some blanks within the data provided and some weird addresses, but in reality there are email addresses in there as well. For example, if I just pop in a filter here, we can just quickly look one up as we can see there. So let's just quickly use one example. We can see, so one example, as the identifier has a reference type location ID, that's what we're using, and all the reference IDs. So these are all potentially the locations that user, one example, has access to within the setup. Okay, so that's how this works. So if I just take that back out again, that's absolutely fine, and I can save that away. I don't need to apply anything else to this. I just need to publish that as a report. Well, as I've already got it, I'll just delete this particular version. I don't need it. I've already created that report. Okay, so that's the report that works out the locations for each particular user. We've already done the client reference ID to work out the data for the organization that this user is going to log into, and we've put the user within that particular client organization. So we already know that everything's dropping into the right place. We just need to apply this filter to the data as well now. So this particular user only sees the data relevant to the locations that they actually are using. So to do that, jump into the administration console. Access filters are on data. They're on your data source. So in this sense, we're going to go to my data, which is my data source, and jump into the access filters. And as you can see, I've already created one called local ID. And within local ID, my location access filter, that's the report that I just showed you. Excuse me. So I could change that. I could pick a different report, but actually that report is doing the job perfectly well. Thank you very much. My refresh type is append, so I'm going to append any new users that are added to this automatically, and I can set my refresh schedule from anything from a minute to hours, whatever, daily, however you want to do this, that's absolutely fine. If I just quickly click on records, I'll see what it's brought in. So it's looked at my various tables, it's looked at that user report, it's looked at the user IDs that exist within the client organizations, and it's seen that there are certain names already and location types and reference IDs for those names already. Okay, so that's what it's done, and it can see I've got 2 users. That's all I've got defined in my setup, in my system. So I've got radar SSO test and 1 example, and it's already looked at this and determined that actually 1 example has got access to all these locations, radar SSO test has only got access to these locations. So it's already got those in place, it's picked those up from what I've provided, and everything's absolutely fine and dandy. So I can submit that, job done. That access filter is now set on that data source, okay? I save that away. So that's done. I've done my client organizations. I've now updated my data. Everything is happy. The only thing I've left to do is ensure that my view has this access filter applied to the location area as well. So I'm only looking at the right information for that particular user. So if I jump into the data view, I can do that exactly in here and edit that. As we can see, location ID, organization ID, date number. So organizational ID has already been picked up in the previous video. We looked at the client organization side of things, so that's already been picked up. But the location ID, what I need to ensure is that I have my access filter defined, and I have. That is exactly what I picked up earlier on and what I created. So that is set up and ready to go. It gives me it as an option. I can just tick it and define it. Okay, so that's now set and ready to go, and if I publish that and save that, we're good to go. One quick thing, I'm just going to quickly circle back rounds to that report. I did mean to mention this a moment ago, so let me quickly grab that report. Again, that location access filter report. When you do publish this report, it's very important to ensure that you turn on this section. So when you go to publish it, when you give it its name, ensure you go to report settings and flick this switch to say this can be used as an access filter. Okay, I did mean to mention this before, my apologies, but it is really important. Without doing that, the data source side of things will not pick up this report as an access filter. Okay, so you do need to have that switch turned on. And that should be that. So if we log out now and we log back in as one of those users, we should see the client organization has filtered the data so that you won't get any more data than you're allowed, and B, the user ID now has been activated, and we can only see the actual data that user has access to within the locations. So 402, 403 and 404 for this radar user. That's absolutely correct. That's what we fully expected from our database. And then for 1 example, as another example, we can see that 1 example, although they do have access to a lot more locations for that particular user within that organization, at this particular instance, the only data available to this particular user is for location IDs 41 and 63. Okay, so it's already filtering all of that stuff out. It's got the correct organization ID. It's got the right data for that particular user. There could potentially be more, so we could add in data for these other locations, and this user would pick them up because they're allowed. But right now, there's only 2 of them available. And they are, as we saw a moment ago, 41 and 63. Okay, so that should be that. That should be all the filtering. We should be at a good place now. And create any reports. Ensure that when you do create those reports, that what you actually do is turn on those filters for the report. So if I go to create one now, I do that with the data. I can drag in my data, of course. Whatever I want to actually see, but do ensure that down the bottom here we do actually turn on the filters that are relevant to what we're looking at. So data in this view has access filters. Well, first off, yes, we want to make sure that we're actually getting the organization filter applying and the location ID for this particular user. You can turn them both on. because I'm in the default client org, there is no data for the default client org, so we're going to get a sad face. However, when we come to publish this, and we'll save this as test 2, for example, and I drop this into anything. That was actually test app, that's fine, doesn't matter. If I log in as one of those users now, and go and find that report, we'll see that it actually has the relevant information in it filtered for that particular user and organization, and that's all that we're getting back from the data source. Okay, so hopefully that will set up your client organizations and your access filters on users and location IDs.